Well, good morning once again, everybody, and welcome to episode number 48. Boy, we're almost getting up to a 1 year anniversary of the 5 year real estate career video podcast. My name's Patrick Butler. I'll be your host today, bringing with you my two esteemed colleagues, Mr. Eric Wilner, the automatic landlord, and Mr. Skip Wiley, the fanatical marketeer. Today, we're going to talk about something that's very near and dear to all of our hearts, and that's mastering the new buyer brokerage landscape. Yes, if you've been under a rock, in 2024, a landmark legal decision was made, and the National Association of Realtors and all major brokers were involved with how buyer brokerage needs to be documented, presented, and manifested as we work through the real estate industry. Well, no matter what we talk about, our 5 year real estate career is designed to help you take a real estate career and blossom it into a money machine, something that will pay you abundantly for the rest of your life in 5 short years. And we do that through a series of very specified strategies and theories. 5 years to financial freedom only can happen with one major component. And gentlemen, that begins with the letter L. What is it?
Leads.
Leads. That's right.
Leads.
So in the next 30 minutes, we're going to cover this topic. So a couple of thoughts, though. Are you looking for a way to build stronger client relationships and instill trust, particularly with your buyers? Well, this landscape change is one great way to navigate through that. Secondly, would you like to be able to differentiate yourself in a very competitive landscape? Fortunately, for those of us that are in the business, the real estate industry is shrinking in population, requiring better skill sets in a more competitive environment. And last but not least, if nothing else, wouldn't you like to remain compliant and reduce legal risks in your day-to-day business? Because, it's not always about how much money you make, it's how much you get to keep at the end that really matters. Income is the only outcome, as Mr. Eric Wilner talks about. So we're going to cover all of that and more. What I'd like to do, though, is I'm going to share my screen because Skip Wiley is going to lead us down a little bit of an adventure today. Skip, as you may or may not know, is with eXp Realty. That is one of the tips and components in his 5 year career with all of the wonderful abilities to generate direct, indirect, and passive income. So I'm going to go ahead and put this slide deck up, and Eric, Skip, and I are going to navigate through this together, and we hope that you will find it to be a compelling story. And let me go ahead and make this view much prettier for our audience. Here we go. All right, so Mr. Skip Wiley, Mr. Eric Wilner, let's go on the journey to discovering the buyer's agency. Eric, why don't you tell us a little bit about the history of this?
Well, they kid around and say that real estate is the second oldest profession in the world.
Yes.
And, we've seen the real estate business go through some, lots of evolutions, right? But more recently, in recent history, and as you can see, it's a trend towards clarifying what is the role of the realtor. In the 1990s, the introduction of the buyer agency agreement, where it was proposed that sometimes maybe buyers would be better off if they were represented exclusively by a buyer's agent, and a buyer's agent was the exclusive representative of a buyer. And then in the 2000s, we started seeing the rise of the internet and how that affected real estate, all the way to the point of today where we have the cloud-based companies. We got virtual office websites in the 2000s. So a lot has happened since the millennial. And then we of course can't forget that 2007, 2008, the real estate market bubble, but it was really an all market crash in 2008, and it took almost 10 years to fully emerge from that. And then just as we were getting out of that in 2017, 18, we fall into COVID, the 100 year, every 100 year, we have a pandemic of a major nation, a once in a lifetime event. And COVID really changed a lot of things forever. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But now, most recently, we have this antitrust class action lawsuit And again, think back to the buyer agency back in the 1990s, over 30, 40 years ago. This is all about defining what the buyer broker role is, who pays, who in reality pays. We were having a little discussion before coming on here, and 10 years ago, the seller was expected to pay the commission to the listing broker, who then split that commission and paid the buyer, the buyer's agent. But the buyer's agent's fiduciary responsibility was really to the seller who was paying them. So a lot of buyers, called up their handy dandy realtor, believed that they were being represented. In other words, it was us against them, but my realtor was on my side, and that wasn't really the case. And that's just in the last 30 years.
Yep. And speaking of fiduciary, Skip, this is your slide deck, and we do thank you for sharing that. Eric just talked about fiduciary, and what does that actually mean? I mean, why do we have a fiduciary relationship with anybody?
Well, let me put it like this. If you're a listing agent and you get a buyer that wants to buy your property, it's impossible to represent both parties with 100% fiduciary relationship. Well, not impossible, but very unlikely that that is going to happen. One of the parties may get a better treatment, fewer disclosures than the other party. So the real reason why this rule changed is twofold. Real estate agents were showing properties that paid them more money. They could see that in the MLS, and they refused to show properties where their income was going to be significantly reduced. Well, that's good for the real estate agent, but how much of a fiduciary relation is that with the buyer? Because quite frankly, their motivation was based on greed rather than motivation of selecting the best property for the buyer. So part of this major lawsuit was simply to have real estate agents provide a better level of service and to really be more in tune with that fiduciary relationship they should have with the buyer, irrelevant of what their commission is.
Yeah, and
And
I
a
think one of the
fiduciary relationship has really become, very common conversation. And who kind of led this was in the financial services industry, right? You now hear people differentiating themselves. And by the way, as a positive attribute, saying that I'm a fiduciary. In other words, I have accepted a legal responsibility to represent you. And so you now talk to financial planners that are fiduciaries or are not. And if you talk to a financial planner that doesn't have a fiduciary responsibility, he may do just what Skip said. His company tells him what products to sell, what products have the highest benefit for them. But someone who has a fiduciary responsibility to you, the client, is a higher level of trust and also legal responsibility.
Yeah, and I think the spirit of this slide, and we'll move on to the next one, really is to articulate that to your buyer clients and or
Absolutely.
customers. If you're going to be a transaction broker, they're going to be a customer. If you're a buyer's broker, they are your client. But to articulate that, because that's where the value comes in. And we're going to talk a little bit about compensation as that relates to this value articulated. Okay. Consistency. I'll go ahead and hit this one. Consistency. Eric and I were also talking earlier, and we said, one of the things about McDonald's, the great Ray Kroc success story, whether you like them or not, is they built their brand on consistency. You could go to McDonald's in Oregon or one in Virginia, and they were identical in their service delivery, their product. And that consistency is something that the customer came to expect. And hence, they've sold billions of burgers and other products. So the need for a quality professional agent has never been stronger than right now. So consistently, we talk about three key strengths here. One of them is advocacy through tools and resources. So as we move through this next evolution of technology, does your website help buyers more than just attract them? Does your advertising bring them into a process that they can feel comfortable and feel as though they're being represented? And are you an expert in the local marketplace? And if not, do you have team members that can provide that? Because what we've been tagged as in a lot of these news stories is glorified door openers and taxi drivers. And that's not
Absolutely.
what the good buyer's agent brings to the table. And then last but not least, the processes that may be unique to your location. Skip, take us on this next journey, preparing for success.
Well, if you're going to represent people in today's world, you've got to be first and foremost, you've got to have online presence, and everything that we should be doing as real estate agents today, if we want to work with buyers, is tell our story and tell it everywhere. Tell our, how the industry has changed. First, tell that story, that the new buyer agency agreements, the single property or the exclusive buyer agencies agreements that a buyer has to sign before they can technically see real estate. Also, as we use social media, we should tell our personal story about what we do for our clients, because when you're going to ask someone to sign an agreement that obligates them to a commission, you're going to have to convince them that you actually do something more than just open the door, as you so aptly put it. And we can do this through a number of different ways. We can do it through videos. We can do it through buyer packets. We can do it through resumes that we create about our past history of success. All of these things are really critical things that we have to do as a real estate agent that we did not have to do a year ago, because most of the time, I'll just say this. The top agents in our industry for years have done everything I've just outlined to capture more buyers, because their preparation up front was far better than the average agent. So now all the agents who are going to remain in our industry have to be better at selling the benefit of using them as either an exclusive or a single property showing. And the final thing is, you want to have a process. You want to use the same process every single time. Process means using maybe the same title company, or maybe recommending the right inspection company. All the vendors have a major impact on the success of a buyer buying a piece of real estate. So all three of these components, social media, having a buyer packet, having a resume on yourself, doing videos about what makes you different, are vitally important in today's world if you're going to be a successful real estate agent. You got to present more, sell the benefit of using you more.
Amen. Very
A
good.
pilot
Oh, sorry.
doesn't get into the cockpit without a checklist. He has a process every time. And even though he's done it 1,000 times, he still checks the box of each. And presenting that to your potential buyer that you're going to take gives them a level of confidence that this is part of a consistent process to follow. And
And I
it
have one thing to
builds.
add to your comment about the pilot. I don't get into the airplane unless I know the pilot is experienced. Because I'm not jumping onto a big airplane and risking my life without knowing who I'm in business with. And the same thing true in real estate now.
Yep, good point. All right, so Eric, what is a buyer's favorite radio station? You're a radio talk show host. I've always heard it's WIFM. What's in
Yes,
it for
right.
me?
What's in it? What's in it for me, right? And that's what we have to do. As an agent, we really, as an agent, the definition is that we're in service of someone else. So the first and foremost goal, if you're in this business, and you're not a person of service, you're probably in the wrong business. And you see, buyers who are the reason for our business are willing to pay for value, right? They're willing to pay for convenience. Are you going to save them what? Are you going to save them time? Are you going to save them from making a mistake? Are you going to save them money in the process? So that's why, that checklist, one of the things in the process needs to be, and think about this one, a little extra for a second. This, when you first meet your buyer, before you ever show them a property, there should be an interview, and it's a two-way interview, right? It's an interview of, do I want to work with this buyer? Is this buyer the right profile for the way I'm able to give the best service? And vice versa, they're going to be evaluating you. Are you the right person for them to work with? So again, showcase your savings. And like I said, savings come in the form of time and money. And P.S. If I were to, people say that time equals money. I would say that time is more valuable than money. I can go make more money. I can never get back the time that I lost. And so it's things like that, and price reductions, or structuring the contracts, or getting concessions in the negotiation. All of these things are very valuable, and they can be quantified in dollars. So I have a saying that says value articulated is value appreciated. And that's what you want to do by having a good preparation, the system, a good presentation, and be more than just answer the question, why should they do business with you rather than everybody else?
And I have a comment to add to that, Eric, very important. If I'm a buyer, do I want to work with a brand new agent right out of getting their license, or an agent who over the past 10 or 15 years has negotiated transactions to save the buyer money? Maybe the buyer didn't have enough money and they needed additional money to pay for their closing costs. New agents may not know how to do that. Experienced agents, someone who's been trained and coached well, can be a better partner when you're getting ready to buy your first home.
Well,
Yep.
that
And
coaching.
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Skip made an excellent point about the coaching. Just like your example, Patrick, you can put a pimple-faced 16-year-old behind the cash register or in the kitchen at McDonald's because they have a system. So it doesn't matter whether he's fresh off the street, the client gets a consistent outcome. And so with the proper coaching, with the proper process and systems, even a new agent, and I want to talk to you new agents, you have the opportunity to come out of the gate running if you have those things in place first.
Absolutely.
Absolutely correct. And I was going to say, if this was a 30-minute sitcom, right now would be a great time for a commercial break. And all of the things that we've been talking about right now are things that we do in the 5-year real estate career with you or for you. So things like home buyer webinars, where we articulate all of these great values are important for us generating that level of trust, for exposing that, and using the one-to-many process of one-hour webinar to speak to 50 or 60 home buyers is just good business. So on to our slideshow. All right, Skip, how do you serve them? What is the mindset that's going to be most beneficial for us to gain the trust of our buyers?
Well, first and foremost, the internet. When we get buyers, we generally find them in a couple of unique ways. You just talk about a primary way that at the 5-year real estate career, we find dozens and dozens and dozens of buyers every year. And that's through the webinars we do. And during that webinar, this educational process about how the real estate market has changed, it's easy for us to sell them on our professionalism. And when our professionalism is there, they're very willing to develop a partnership with us. And that's a key ingredient to what I call serving them better. And building trust is a key ingredient in any sales relationship. Somebody attends a webinar, they gain a lot of confidence in us, and then walking them through the agreement that we must have signed is critically important. Also, educating our past clients about how the real estate market has changed is also a critical thing. But we have already created a business strategy to do that. So when we bring people into the 5-year real estate career, we're going to coach them on how to educate their buyers that they might get from the internet, might get from a webinar that we produce, on how the business has changed. And here's what's the most important part about mindset. we have to have the right mindset to be able to help somebody. If our mindset is how much commission we're going to generate, that is not going to work in this new world. Our mindset should be, how can we serve a customer better? How can we protect them? How can we be a better fiduciary? And how can we find them the right piece of real estate? So that's really important.
Got it. And so the next two slides are going to cover both of these. The one on the left talks about the brand new to you buyer customer that came from an ad of some kind. And the second one is so Eric, walk us through the 4 steps to building trust with a brand new customer that you've never met before.
Sure. Are you trying to advance the slide? There we go.
I did advance the slide. Here, I can. Oh, yeah, it's there. Maybe it was a little slow internet connection.
Yeah, I think so. So anyway, obviously everything starts with leads. You know, we talk about the important leads are the lifeblood of any business. No different here in the real estate world. And you know, probably one of the most common complaints today that I hear about real estate agents is that they never answer the phone. Answer your phone, people. You got to answer the phone. So when you answer the call is when you establish the reputation, the trust, the relationship all begins. Now, then what do all of your buyers want? They want to go see properties, and that's not the first step of the process. And again, if you have a process, you can bring them through that. But answer the call, establish what property they're looking for. You know, this is that interview. First, we're interviewing about should we work together? Then I want to go a little bit deeper. What is it that you're trying to accomplish when buying a property? You know, is it for you to live in? Is it important to have proper or proximity to work or schools and so forth? And then, and only after then, do you set the appointment and actually physically go see properties. You know, it's a very good practice. You can do a lot of self introduction consistently by creating a quick 3-minute video explaining who you are, a quick introduction, and why and how you work ethically within the regular guidelines, which are designed to protect the buyer. And then the next thing, you know, they said, at this point right now, you've established that relationship, you've established that um, direction of where you're going. You know, you're the niche of what their target is. But they say that the riches is in the niches, but I'm going to tell you that the fortune is in the follow-up. See, follow-up is where a lot of agents fall down. They don't stay in communication with their clients. They don't follow up information that they promised. And so make sure that you're regularly following up with a call or a text, asking if they have any questions up until now. Get the feedback, take the temperature, and if necessary, show more property. But this is really, notice that showing the property is not even one of the first 2 steps. And finally, at the first point of meeting, that's what the law says. You want to make sure that they have seen and signed the buyer's agency agreement, the buyer brokerage agreement. And that, I'm going to tell you, will elevate your level and your professionalism in their sight if done professionally and correctly.
Yep. And the follow-up component, folks, if you're doing webinars as an example, and you're getting 30, 40 customers per webinar, if you're trying to do that manually, you will fail miserably. The customers will never get the follow-up they need. You have to have a good CRM, a client or customer relationship management software. Part of our 5-year career is that we utilize one such tool, and we do it for you. So again, another reason to reach out to us, give us a call, work with us, partner with us. We're more than happy to share the wealth. So that's cold leads. Eric, thank you for that. Skip, I'm going to take the one on referral clients, and then we'll move on for the rest of this this presentation. But past clients, a little bit different, right? You don't have to go through the same process with past clients, referrals, friends, family. They already know who you are, and hopefully they know what you do. So what do we do with these folks to get them to do their second, third, fifth real estate transaction with us as both buyers and sellers. You know, so setting expectations
obviously,
in the
if we've
current
helped
market is critical.
someone,
Skip, go ahead.
yeah, obviously, if we've helped someone in the past, we did it entirely different than the way we did it today. Have to do it today. In the past, I would pick up a client, had no documentation necessary that they needed to sign before I showed them property. But today, what we could do on that last video that we looked at, there was a recommendation that we do a 3-minute video, and that video should explain the new process under the NAR ruling. And it's very simple if you have that video to send it to all of your existing customers that are in your database, because believe it or not, some of them are going to buy another property from you in the next 6 months, in the next year, the next 3 years. And none of them understand the changes that have taken place in the real estate industry since the lawsuit. So the best strategy is to basically notify those people as if they were current buyers. Let them know about the changes that have taken place, because when they get ready to make another purchase or to sell a piece of property, there are both new rules on the seller side and on the buyer side. And you know what I've discovered personally is many of my friends think now they don't have to pay the buyer side commission at all because of this new ruling. But 95% of all the sales that have been taking place in the US in the past 6 months, the seller is still paying the bulk of the real estate commission. So this is an education process that where we target the people that we have already done business with. We're providing them with information about how the market has changed, both on the seller side, selling side, and on the buyer side. And it's all about consistency, us being consistent and providing value added education to the people that we have relationships with.
Amen to that. So that comes down to the basic premise of value and the benefit to them as to why we deserve to get paid a commission for working with them as a buyer. Eric, you're a investor extraordinaire. You work with a lot of different types of buyers, whether they're first-time buyers or savvy buyers. You got to articulate benefit to these folks. Otherwise, they'll go off and do something else.
That's exactly right. And it's also, you know, the probably one of the founding reasons why we started our radio show, which is now celebrating its 25th year on the air. It's establishing the value up front, explaining the process. You know, for the longest time, I used to tell people, you know, to sort of capture their attention, is that, you know, I do real estate backwards, and they would say, "What do you mean by that?" And I said, well, most of the time, a buyer calls up an agent and says that they want to go out and buy a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. They both jump into their cars, they meet, and they go look at the house. Well, in the investment world, I go out and I go find the house first that makes sense and is a great value, has positive cash flow, can be purchased with some equity already built in. And now, you see, because I explained that up front, the value is already established. What am I getting with working with this agent? Well, he's a very experienced investor. He knows what to look for. He has my ultimate interest, which is, you know, ROI in mind. So having different strategies, whether you're in new construction, first time home buyer, like the different webinars that we talk about, having that strategy and the system in place demonstrates a lot of value and professionalism, and it makes clear what the benefit is to the buyer and why. Again, the answer is, why should they work with you versus anywhere else? Plus, Skip was saying, you know, an experienced agent or an experienced team, you could be a new agent on an experienced team,
Absolutely.
and now you have access to a deep bench, right? Vendors, appraisers, contractors, plumbers, painters, you know, all of the different participants in a real estate transaction, the attorneys, etc. And again, when you become the local area expert. You become of more value, and you can bring more to the table than what anybody else could do with a simple Google search or a Yelp search. So that's why establishing the value and the benefit is so important. And when you think about how you're compensated, we said that compensation follows great service and a great result. If the average agent spends somewhere between 80 to 100 hours in a buyer transaction, but look what the commission is, it's very handsome. Most buyers don't understand. They think that you went and showed one house and you got paid, 5 figures for showing them a house. Whereas when you understand that you're going to invest probably 100 hours into that, delivering the value, then everything looks a lot more reasonable. Back to you.
Amen to that. All right, let's move on. So let's talk a little bit about how we're paid, and we'll probably run a little long in today's webinar. So let's be mindful of our guests that are here for the 30 minutes. But Skip, how are you paid?
Well, we always get paid when we perform, and that means our payment is at closing as part. It can. We're talking here though about buyers and how the agreement reads about how we are paid. So in this particular case, our payment is at closing as part. It's listed as part of the closing cost of the transaction. Sometimes at the closing, there are seller concessions that are part of a transaction. The last two transactions I had here, in addition to the commission, we were able to negotiate for the buyer because of our knowledge of the conditions of the property and just the general market here. We were able to negotiate that the seller paid for all of the buyer's closing costs. And finally, we can request the seller to pay the buyer broker fee 100%. In the new world, supposedly, the buyer may be forced to pay the commission for himself in the new world. But in the past 6 months, with all the changes that have taken place and the re-education of both the seller and the buyer, still today, 95% of those transactions, the seller has contributed both commission, concessions in order to sell their property. Now, there may be some time in the future where a buyer really wants to buy a piece of property, and the seller refuses to pay any commission to the buyer's agent. And in that case, that buyer is going to have an option of paying that commission to the agent or perhaps finding a new piece of real estate. And yeah, if I could just go ahead and continue on with this.
Yeah.
The buyer pays the broker. The buyer pays the broker. Not very common in today's world. The seller pays the buyer's broker, which is the most common way that the buyer's agent gets paid. The seller's concession to the buyer, and the buyer pays the buyer's broker. So there's essentially three ways. There's only two people in the transaction. The seller's going to pay the commission, or the buyer is going to pay the commission, or perhaps they share in the payment of the commission. But in most cases, based on today's current world, 95% of all the transactions that are being done, the agent who is knowledgeable is asking the seller to pay the commission on behalf of the buyer.
Yeah. And so I'd like to just paraphrase all of that into something. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Patrick.
No, I was going to say, I'd like to paraphrase this. As long as I've been in real estate for nearly 40 years, I have always said to a seller, particularly the for sale by owner who's trying to save the commission, is, ladies and gentlemen, let it be known, the buyer always pays the full commission. In fact, the buyer pays the seller's home equity. The buyer pays off the seller's mortgage. The buyer pays off any costs. Well, how is that, Patrick? How does that work? Well, when somebody buys a house, they get a mortgage. They also have to come up with a down payment, which covers the entire cost of the purchase of the home. that money slides over to the seller side of the settlement statement, and that's where all the deductions come from. So where what Skip just explained is a little challenging for people to comprehend. The real difficult time is if the buyer has to come out of pocket to pay that commission. Now, if they can pay a little bit more for the home, that's a fractional difference in monthly payments to them. It doesn't affect their down payment much, but it then takes that chunk of cash and enables everybody to pay the commissions on that. If the buyer has to come out of pocket, very different story. And in many cases, that house that's requiring that will not sell in today's market. And we must articulate that to home sellers. Eric, I think you were going to have a comment on that as well.
You read my mind. The fact of the matter is that a commission gets paid, and in a for sale by owner, we see this all the time. That the assumption that the buyer makes is that if the for sale by owner is not using an agent, then he saved the money, which he should pass on to the buyer's expenses anyway. So the bottom line is that nothing has really changed. When you really take a step back, nothing has really changed. Just the transparency and the clarity of how we do it is now in the forefront.
Yeah,
and
it's
the
fully
only thing
disclosed. The only major difference is now it's fully disclosed, and in the past, it was kind of a secret until everybody got to the closing table. And I think that's a tremendous benefit for the buyer and quite frankly, the seller.
Yeah, and all of this hullabaloo the only thing that actually did change is that the seller, or rather, excuse me, the listing brokerage no longer receives the full commission and then pays the cooperating broker. That's the only thing that's different. The seller still funds it, or the buyer, whomever. But that's the only thing this whole law changed, complicating the business. But again, that's an opportunity for us to simplify what seems to be an extremely complicated mess for our buyer and seller customers. And again, we do that very well in our home buyer webinars. All right, so why direct compensation from the seller? Skip, this was your expertise, so why don't you share this with us?
Yeah, this document that's in front of us, there are two documents. This is called direct compensation from seller, and it's submitted prior to showing any property. So in today's world, the best way for a buyer to work with a broker is to set up a buyer consultation. When I talk to people on our webinars, or if I meet someone who's getting ready to go through the process of buying a home, I simply say, hey, before we go out and look at property, the next step for us is to grab a cup of coffee at Starbucks, come to my whatever, meet them somewhere and sit down and have a true buyer consultation. And our agreement at EXP, by the way, there are multiple agreements that are slightly different than this one. This is a non-exclusive agreement, meaning that when you sign this agreement with an EXP agent, you could go right out tomorrow and sign the same agreement with another agency. So you're not restricted to using us exclusively. You only use us because you like us, you trust us, and we help you buy that property. But this is the actual agreement that a buyer is going to sign to work with us on a semi-exclusive basis. It's an agreement that specifies on page 2 of this agreement. Patrick, I think you have page 2 as well on the slide. You may or may not.
Nope.
Okay, well, you just leave it here, and I'll just cover a couple of things about it. Page 2 of this agreement says that it's very clear. It says that the seller is going to pay the commission directly to the broker who brings him a buyer. It says in the agreement that there's a commission due on the transaction of 2.5%, and the buyer's agent, the person who gets you to sign this agreement, is going to collect that commission in the agreement from the seller of that property. It obligates you to pay that commission of 2.5% in the event the seller does not agree to pay it. Now, this agreement can be modified, and we're going to talk about that on the next page. So quickly go to the next page because we're running long. So we're going to deal this. So somebody want to ask me some questions and I'll give you the quick answers.
All right, so we are now representing a buyer. We've got a signed buyer brokerage agreement from them. Let's say I'm the agent and I've got that signed agreement. What if I'm out of town? Does the agent that's covering for me need a separate agreement?
The answer is no. The agent, if you're working for the same company and Patrick, you have an agreement signed, you asked me to show the property. I do not need a buyer's agreement signed when I show that property on your behalf.
Okay. Eric, next question.
So what if I'm on a team and I have another agent on my team showing it?
Same answer. You don't need an additional agreement signed because you have a different person showing that buyer.
Okay. Here's a good question because as I understand the buyer brokerage policy, if your buyer brokerage agreement says that you will earn, let's call it up to 3%, and there's a higher commission, you may be not able to earn that. So what if my buyer agrees to pay more because of new home construction, or that the builder's offering more of a commission, or there's a bonus offered by the seller?
I just had that exact this is a perfect example. Just recently, I showed a person a property. They went back to the builder. The builder is now paying a $2,000 bonus on that transaction. So in order for me to collect that $2,000 bonus over the standard 3% commission that they were paying, I had to get a modified agreement signed by the buyer, which I did, and the buyer did not object to that increase in commission that I received. Had they rejected that additional amount, I would not have been able to earn it. So this agreement can be modified, either raised or lowered by the buyer. The buyer's entirely in control.
Yeah, the bottom line is disclosure, right? So what if the agent is representing their own family? Do they need a buyer broker agreement?
Yes, they do.
Okay, that's pretty simple.
Straightforward.
And if a buyer starts off unrepresented, but after contract acceptance wants representation, is it too late?
Legally, you cannot do that under the new law. You must have an agreement with a buyer before you show them property. So the answer to the question is no.
Yeah, but now it's funny that relates to us as real estate agents. But if they want to hire an attorney at the 11th hour, they can do that all day long.
They can do that, but
Yep.
we cannot do that. We have to have a signed agreement with them. There are two types of agreements. The one you looked at, which is a semi-exclusive agreement, where we represent a buyer to show multiple properties to them, or what is very common today for real estate agents is there is a single property buyer agreement. Somebody calls me on the phone, they say, Skip, I'd like to go out and see this particular property. Technically, this is exactly what I must do. I must send them by email a form for them to sign to show them that particular property. That's called the single property buyer broker agreement.
I have a friend who explains that in very simple terms. He says, whenever I meet with a new buyer, I explain that there's 3 ways we can have a relationship. It's kind of like dating. We can have a one-night stand. We can have a short-term relationship, or we can be in a committed long-term relationship. And that's how this business works today.
Hey, I love it. I'm going to steal it. That's a great way to illustrate. But the single property buyer broker agreement, you just email it over to them. They sign it. It doesn't obligate them at all other than for that single property that you show. And yeah, so that answers that question.
So what if the buyer won't sign the buyer broker agreement?
Unless you're dishonest, you cannot work with them.
Okay,
So
good enough.
Not even a one-night stand.
Not even a one-night stand.
Wow.
If you value your license, that is the law.
And this obviously does not apply to tenants, or does it?
Absolutely applies to tenants. In our back office, we at EXP, we haven't used SkySlope. There is a form in there. If you're going to work with a tenant, it's the form properly discloses the relationship.
Got it. Eric, why don't you take the last one?
Yeah, and that's an interesting twist, right? What if I'm holding an open house for my seller? Do I need a buyer broker agreement when people come in?
Yesterday, day before yesterday, I called our state broker and asked that question because I quite candidly had no clue. And I'm holding an open house tomorrow. So here's what I was told, and I also verified it later by asking another state broker, and I got the same answer. The answer is this: if somebody comes to your open house and looks at your property, and you can talk about that property all day long, but the minute you have a dialogue relevant to other pieces of real estate that that person might have an interest in, you are obligated to get either a single property buyer disclosure or the disclosure we looked at earlier. And that is sadly the law.
Interesting.
And there's your page too, but I think we already covered this, so we'll move on to
Yeah.
the next.
Yeah, we did.
Okay, so that was basically the content. Lots to digest. Something that's vital, though, that we all understand exactly how to articulate that clearly and easily. And I think the best tip out of this whole thing is shoot a 3-minute video explaining it. Get your script down, use your chat GPTs or talk to us. We can help you work that out and even help you shoot the video as part of our 5-year career offering. So it's vital that we go through that process. All right, and then Skip, I guess a commercial message for you and Eric as both
Well,
realtors.
it's actually, you don't have to be with EXP to get additional data. All you have to do is go to exptoolkit.com buyer representation. And all of the information that we spoke about today is there. We recommend, I don't care what company you work for, you go to school, you get a license to work with buyers, to work with sellers. It would be ridiculous to spend all that money and then lose your license because you don't do it the right way. And so please take advantage of that information, no matter where you work.
All right, so that wraps up our content. We ran a little long, but vital that we continue to educate. So we invite you to not just listen to the content, use what you've learned. Visit us at the 5-year career website, which is right over my shoulder here, or definitely come to our YouTube site, which is at symbol 5-year career. We have tons of videos, lots of great content, whether it's on new construction, working with investors, affinity marketing, and first-time homebuyer programs. We encourage you also to join us at one of our first-time homebuyer webinars, which you can sign up for at 5yearcareer.com. Kick the tires, see how that works, see how many people show up and how engaged they are. We would love to build a team around you and help you grow that business. So until next time, we're going to hit the stop record button and we'll catch you on the next episode of 5-Year Career Podcast.